The two main enemies are, on the one hand, pessimism, and on the other hand, optimism. And let me explain what I mean by that. Optimism can be the enemy of the libertarian activist if you become so consumed by either the belief that what the state does is so morally horrendous that, you know, the heavens should crumble rather than it go on one more day, or that what the state is doing is so pragmatically damaging that, like the hard money people believe, that it's going to really bring civilization to a collapse if it's not started. That you feel like it has to change now. This next election, something has to happen. You know, we need the million votes. We need the, you know, the federal candidates to win. And if you get so consumed with that belief that it has to happen and it could happen, and it doesn't happen in the short term, that can completely sap your will, can completely sap your energy. Despair will descend. Short-term optimism is a mistake and a problem. However, long-term pessimism is also a mistake and a problem, and I think one that will be beaten out of you if you read my book, and that's not just a commercial. I think when you see the arc of what these brave eccentrics whose stories I tell in my book, from Ayn Rand to Leonard Read to Friedrich Hayek, have managed to achieve, not so much in terms of changing the world, though there's been some of that. I mean, Milton Friedman, the great libertarian, is really directly responsible for the fact that we no longer have a draft. He was the intellectual spark plug behind the Nixon-era Gates Commission that managed to convince Nixon that he could and should get rid of the draft. So that, you know, Charles Murray, the libertarian writer on welfare, was extremely influential on the good but not good enough welfare reforms we saw in the Clinton era. You know, there have been real and practical effects of these highfalutin ideas and academics whose stories I tell. But their biggest triumph has been in making more libertarians. The number of people who understand the benefits of free markets, who understand the propriety of a free people, is huge, shockingly huge. I mean, back in the 60s and 70s, you know, when I talked to all these people who were around then, every libertarian knew every other libertarian. They all subscribed to each other's magazines. They all could meet in one convention. We don't all know each other anymore, and that's great. You know, we get surprised by finding each other in the weirdest places, and we'll find each other in places where, I mean, we're, you know, the very fact that we're all here means, you know, that we're kind of into it pretty deeply. But what delights me is finding someone who you kind of start talking about politics, and they're not really into this stuff, you know, in a real sense. They're not reading Reason, they're not members of the L.P., but this is what they believe about politics, and there's lots of them out there, and I meet them every day. And while I'd love for them to start reading Reason, and I'd love for them to join the L.P., it is still a victory for the movement that they're out there and they believe these things. So I think the libertarian story, despite the fact that we are far from a libertarian paradise, has been an absolutely encouraging, optimistic, and glory-filled story, without making the mistake of thinking that we've gotten so far that the total change is right around the corner. It might not ever be around the corner. That's one of the insights of sort of the great 19th century classical liberal forebears of libertarianism, is they understood the fight of the individual and the voluntary social order against those who would try to run it and try to manage it is eternal. You know, we've always had with us kings and tyrants. They used to be called kings. Now they're often called presidents, but we've always had them with us, and it's possible we may always will have them with us, but it is our responsibility and hopefully also our joy to help fight against them. And I'm going to close with another quote from Ms. Rose Wilder Lane, which I think is a great little point to end on, and something that everyone, which I assume includes everyone in this room, who has ever done anything anywhere to try to explain to another human being why liberty is a good thing, why free markets are a good thing. This is something that I think we all need to remember and understand. This is in a letter that Rose Wilder Lane wrote to a friend of hers, a man named Jasper Crane, who was an industrialist with the DuPont Corporation, who, like many libertarians were, was kind of depressed about the state of the world in 1958, and depressed about what the freedom movement had managed to accomplish. And this is what Rose Wilder-Lane wrote to him. She said, "You know, remember, there are many, many more efforts of all kinds being made now in the libertarian direction. 20 years ago, do you remember? It was almost impossible to find even one. I used to spend all my time, every day at my typewriter, following up every least little lead that I could find. One example, I heard a high school debate among all pro-New Dealers on the radio, and I wrote to each one of them. One of them replied with all the welfare state collectivist notions that had been put into his head, but he didn't seem wholly unintelligent, so I kept on writing to him for some months, apparently with no effect. Finally, getting no answer. Now he turns up as the publisher of National Review, telling people that I changed his whole life. The whole climate of opinions is changing, and every least little thing that you have done has helped to change it. Never think that a bit of it failed, even when it seemed to." And that was true for her in 1958, and it is still true today. Every time that we can put the ideas of liberty and limited government out into the world,